Hi there, my name's Llewelyn and I'm a writer and theatre producer from Llanelli in West Wales, and today I'm going to be trying to help you to create your own story. So it can seem quite a daunting prospect really of writing a story. How do we start? So I'm going to try and break it down into quite a simple process over time, but the first thing we're going to look at is using our imagination. Something that we probably don't use as adults as much as we certainly used as children. I used it a lot, was certainly told off for daydreaming many times when I was growing up, but then if I hadn't been that kind of way growing up, then I probably wouldn't do the job I do today, which is creating new and exciting work. I know people in the NHS face a very stressful time. My wife is a midwife. I know she works very, very, very hard, long 12-hour shifts at times. And really, it's very important, I know, to look after our mental health. I'm not a mental health expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I am here to try and do something which I think people will find quite a lot of fun. And I think when we're having fun and relaxing, it's something outside of our work, then it's something that really does, help our mental health. So what we'll go and break it down into is looking at the structure of writing a story, and then we'll look at then storyboarding, and again, we'll just look at creating something from nothing. So I hope you enjoy. Okay, so we started talking about using our imagination on how to write a story, but now we're going to look a little bit more at the structure of writing a story. So I'm going to point out the 5 kind of areas of structuring it, but also look at an example of a famous film, just try and explain also how it works in real life, just to simplify it a little bit. So the first thing we look at when we're writing a story is something which is called the exposition. Now the exposition, nice big word, but basically all it means is we're looking at the start of the story. So we're setting the foundations of it. So we're looking at introducing the characters who are in the story, the relationship that they have, and we'll start building the building blocks of where the plot's going to go from that. So this is the start of our story. Don't get too scared about the big words or how the structure works, because I'll explain it through the process this way, and also we'll do a storyboard later, which will again even simplify it further. So if we take a film example, which I think most people know, something like Titanic, the exposition would be the fact that when we meet the characters, for instance, Jack, who wins his ticket, I believe, for the film, if I remember, to get on Titanic, and Rose, the very, very wealthy upper class woman, and then they meet on a boat in their kind of different facets where he saves her from jumping off at one bit. So it kind of tells us the start of the story. So then we look at the second part of structuring, and this is called the rising action. So rising action kind of does exactly what it says on the tin, really. Rising action, it's starting to build, the story's starting to build up. So you start finding that they have feelings for each other. In Titanic would be the example, and their relationship starts building, and you can see where it's going to pretty much end up. And because of that, then that ends up at the biggest part of the film or story, as we're going to look at today, and that is then called the climax. Okay, so it's the big point of the film. So this is when all of a sudden everything is discovered about their relationship, for instance, and of course at the same time this is happening, the ship starts to sink. So it's a very, very, very powerful moment in the film. It's the biggest moment of it. Then we look at something which is probably the most difficult part in storytelling, I would say, I would find, is called the falling action. The falling action, if we look at the example of Titanic, that would be something along the lines of where all of a sudden the ship is now properly sinking, people are starting to leave in the lifeboats if they're fortunate enough to get off it, or in Jack and Rose's instance, it's the bit where they're both holding on to the wreckage of the ship and hoping to survive, but unfortunately, obviously, in the end, Jack succumbs to the cold, and that's the end of the kind of the falling action. The last bit we then get to in a story is something which is called the resolution. The resolution. So the resolution in Titanic, that's the bit at the end you would see where, of course, you see the older version of Rose as she is, and she's actually obviously telling the story from her point of view from it, and it kind of sums up and finishes the film quite nicely. So this will be the end of our story. Somehow we will finish the story, whether it be on a comical end, a fun end, or maybe a sad end, or even an open end, if you are thinking of maybe even going into a sequel, but I think that would probably be a difficult one for a ship that's already sunk on that one. But yeah, that's how we structure it. And now we will look at storyboarding in the next section. Okay, now we're going to be looking at storyboarding. This is where we kind of structure the story in a way where we use pictures, but also then short sentences to explain what's happening in it. Now, I've taken a subject that is very popular in the news at the moment. I've taken a spin-off politics, which is everywhere at the moment, and I've done a new story which I'm calling Drowning Street. If we look at the first picture, this is what we would call the exposition. This is the start of the story where we meet the characters. So they're called Doris, Mad Dean, also Bratty Patel and Grease Hog. And they want to take over the world. So that's the start of our story. We meet the characters and what they want to do. The second part of it, so this is the rising action. So then they try and break lots of rules. They hatch a plan to control the country. And they take it over by using a tune, which they send through all the TVs, of It Wasn't Me by Shaggy. Then we come up to the climax of the story, the biggest part of the story, and their thirst for power. It leads to a battle too far for them, sadly. They wage war with a nation, but they're brought down by their own soldiers in their own party. So that's the climax of it. We come then to the falling action part, which is Doris and his team, including the Haunted Pencil. They move to Barnard Castle, and then a new team takes over. And Doris and his cronies, they rue the day they were crossed. Then we finally get to the last bit of my story, which is the resolution, that the new team is led by No One Trusts. And the rest of the team who were in power, they start to regroup and start a new plot to possibly come back in a sequel. As I said at the start of this, one of my main things is I'm a writer myself. I've written quite a few plays and also pantomimes. Some of them have been performed all over the UK and further across in the Southern Hemisphere in the world as well. But probably my most famous work so far, most well-known work, is a play called Bread in Heaven, which is a play which has taken off a character called Maldwyn Novella Pugh. People might remember was in a film called Grand Slam in 1978. So I got in contact with the actor who played that, and we created a kind of a sequel to it in 2011 based on the Rugby World Cup, with Maldwyn going to New Zealand to help Wales win the World Cup. Again, all this story just comes from imagination. So I just created something from one character from a film and then created a story based on that narrative. So starting, we look at the exposition. So Maldwyn had a dream and he must go to New Zealand to help Wales win the World Cup. The rising action was the team then, they went to New Zealand and they had to do lots of different tasks to try and put off different teams that they were meeting in later rounds of the competition. For instance, they had to put itching powder into the Irish team's clothes, or into the French team. They set off the fire alarm so they got a bad night's sleep. And then Wales made their way to the final, where they were to play New Zealand. In the climax then, Maldwyn, unbelievably, in the last couple of minutes of the game against New Zealand, with the scores very close at that point, comes on with the chance to win with the last kick of the game. And Maldwyn, incredibly, at the age of probably about 65, kicks the ball over and Wales win the World Cup. We then moved on to the falling action, which is the fact of them reveling in the win, basically. There's also a subplot that they'd taken Maldwyn's sister there, unbeknown that there was a rugby tournament on, which of course she found out as well at the climatic bit, which was a kind of a subplot, to say, in that. But then, of course, she discovered that how great a place New Zealand was and forgave everyone and got straight into the afterglory of winning the tournament. The final part was then where we went back to Wales. Maldwyn was in bed, getting ready to go to a local rugby game that day. He wakes up, thinks it's all a dream, but then he pulls back his blanket, and there we see all of a sudden the World Cup trophy is lying there with him. So was it a dream or not? And then it wasn't. It was another one to be continued. So we came back and did a sequel to that then in 2015. So yeah. All that started for me just from one character, and then you can create a whole story from that. But once I had some ideas in my brain, once you got that structure on that, then it's much easier to write the story around it. So that's it for me. Now it's over to you to try it yourself. We've looked at it and broken everything down from when we look at the 5 structures of creating the story. So we look at, remember, the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and then the resolution. you have to use your imagination for this to work, otherwise it won't. I mean, this is where you take yourself into a kind of a relaxed state and have some fun with things. We mentioned different kinds of stories from the news. You can pick out certain characters or certain subjects and just work from that idea, that base idea, and create a story around that. Or, like myself, you can just pick different characters from different shows, work on it that way. Storyboarding I find really helpful because it breaks the structure up, and once you've got that in place, the dialogue then I find comes quite naturally. If you want to try something different as well, try and think of characters in your family, your friends. Those are usually some of the easiest people to write and some of the best characters you know. So try and take those traits and use that in your writing. Most of all, have fun, enjoy it, and try it. And hopefully you'll have a bestseller of your own.